When I think back on all the fears when I was pregnant, all of them dismissed except for one. The only test the state mandated was genetic. Looking for that extra chromosome.
Hello and welcome to the If We Knew Then podcast. I'm Stephen Socks,
And I'm Lori Socks.
and today we're joined again by Stephanie Hall Meredith.
Stephanie's joining us today because she's such an advocate and her knowledge is so deep in disability rights, the history of disability, and the challenges that we're being presented with right now as we face an attack on special education, misperceptions and propaganda about disability, and rights potentially being taken away. It's so important to know those rights, to know our allies, to understand our advocacy so that we don't go backwards. We don't want to see all that great work that has been done for equality and inclusion and equal rights and human rights, because that's really what this is about. It comes down to human rights and that we all have a place.
And the best way to protect ourselves, our loved ones, is to be informed.
And this is a lady who has a lot of information. So welcome, Stephanie.
Hello again.
Hello.
So good to see you. How's your day?
Good to see you too. It's good. It's a Friday, right?
I
So that
know.
makes it a good day.
Happy belated birthday.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I got to celebrate in Orlando because of the National Down Syndrome Congress conference being there. And I either had to pick between celebrating my birthday, driving there, or getting there a day early and going to the park. So we went to the park.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. That's a good birthday celebration.
It was pretty fun.
Oh, yay. Oh, happy day. How was the
Conference.
conference?
It was great. It was busy as always, because I do the leadership training portion of the conference in the beginning. That's normally been Down Syndrome Affiliates in Action, and now it's been added to the National Down Syndrome Congress Conference. So that was Wednesday. We started set up on Tuesday, finished on Thursday, and then NDSC started Thursday to Sunday. So it was a busy week. Lots of good sessions, lots of good conversations and seeing friends, and it's like a reunion and lovely. And
What's the vibe? Like, how do you feel after it's over with everything that's going on with special education?
I guess, and this also happens, I think this goes along with being a general optimist in a lot of things, but I always feel hopeful after being around my people that we can work together to make life better for our loved ones. But I think there's also, discussing. So I was part of the training session for INDAC, which is the Advocacy Coalition for NDSC. And just hearing about a lot of the different concerns at a federal level, obviously it has a lot of people worried. So I feel energized by my people at the conference, but also concerned about the general state of the world.
I think that's why we connect so well, is because I tried to stay optimistic in all, just across the board. And I know that sometimes can come off very naive, or people might think that I don't know what's going on, but I'm well aware of what's going on. I'm well aware of how cruel humanity can be. But on the same note, I'm also aware of how great humanity can be, and how challenge ignites something in us that really gives us the fire and the strength and the determination and focus. Because at times when we're not challenged and we're just, enjoying, which I'm not against at all, but we're enjoying the ease of support, maybe like our advocacy becomes easy, right? Easy. But when we're challenged, that's when nothing changes, but we just dig deeper. And one of the things with Liam returning to school that, I did when I started immediately saw a a little bit of a lackadaisical attitude towards the IEP, I reached out and very directly said, right now, special education is under attack. And because of that, I have very little tolerance for these indiscretions and for, the blatant inappropriateness. They're not, I forget, I don't take them lightly is what I said. And they won't be tolerated. As like last year, we were very open and very understanding, which we still are. And we understand our need to collaborate and support, but we let a lot of things slide. And Liam did suffer some consequences. It made it harder for Liam. It made it harder for us. And this year I was just like, we're not doing that this year because I don't want anybody to think that that is okay. And the rights are still in place. And we're going to make sure that people understand, if there's any confusion, what that means. And that also makes me optimistic because I do know how strong we can be. I do know how powerful our voices can be and how we can individually make changes in our loved ones' lives. We can. And then when that happens en masse, then the change is there.
Yeah, and I think that's where, and I mean, this is difficult because on an interpersonal level, we want to be as collaborative as possible with our IEP team, but at the same time, when we see some of these changes that are happening at the federal level, it does require us to be more vigilant, both at a district and school and state level, because we're a little bit, we don't have the same level of cover that we had when there was when I mean, this is one of the big concerns that was addressed during the advocacy meeting was the proposal to move the Office of Special Education Programs from the Department of Education to Health and Human Services. Because when you do that, they have already cut with the RIFs that they call them, they've already cut a lot of the staff there that had so much expertise. And really what people don't understand a lot of times, because a lot of times you don't realize that the plumbing's working as long as it's working, right?
Yeah.
And what they do often at the Office of Special Education is they provide grants to school districts and different programs that are innovative throughout the country. They gather data to see if school districts and states are following the law. And then if they're not following the law, they help them form a plan to get back on track, or there are consequences if they don't. And so it's coming from both parents advocating from the bottom, but it was also coming from the top. And when you move it over to HHS, you lose a lot of the people who have that expertise. And then on top of that, you also increase the bureaucracy because HHS is actually a much bigger organization or agency. And then also you're putting disability back into that medical model, which we've been trying to move away from and say, it's in every facet of life. And so when we're talking about the education of students with disabilities, we should be talking about it in the education umbrella, not separately in the medical. So it's for all of those reasons, it does put a lot more onus of responsibility on families. And of course, the concern is that sometimes that can be a really expensive fight that people can't afford to do. And sometimes it can be, you can have, like I think it was like 2019, Texas was limiting the percentage of students that they were allowing to have special education services. And that's not legal. I mean,
I was just going to say, how is that legal?
You have to serve the students. And so that's when, again, the federal government Office of Special Education stepped in and said, that's not legal. And you need to change your practice. And then they gave them steps that they needed to take in order to remedy that. So that's what we're potentially losing if it moves.
So would that not happen if it's under, and can you give me the words for the acronyms? HHS?
Oh, sorry. HHS
okay.
is Health and Human Services.
Okay. So if it moves to Health and Human Services, how would that change potentially how that would be handled?
I think you are losing the staff who would be doing the monitoring in order to do that and who have the expertise. Also, you have the state people who don't know who to contact anymore because you're moving things around. Um, but also just the cut in the number of staff. There just aren't enough people to do it. So, um, just a number of issues there. But then the other concern is that there have been proposals to move that funding to the state level. And so and people think, oh, well, it could be better because it's local. But that the problem is that when IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, was passed in 1975, it was administered at the state level. They ended up actually creating the Department of Education in 1979 in order to oversee that because it was being done so differently in different states. And so they were trying to standardize that. And so that's why the idea of block grants to states is very scary to a lot of advocates because it's like you could have states that are doing a better or worse job for families, and there's not really any remedy for them to go to the federal government and say, hey, our state seems like they're not following this.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So it feels like definitely the onus does land on the families and the parents because this is something that we were just speaking about. Like that can be frustrating. I'm trying to remove the frustration of just accepting what it is right now, and and I feel like with that in mind, then it is up to us to forge. Like we have to continue to put eyes on it and make the complaints where we need to, but ultimately that's going to fall back on us, right? That's going to fall back on our collaboration with our team on because and our supporting our student, our making sure that those supports are upheld. It's going to be us that if they fail, it's going to be us that are really doing it. And but I do believe in the power of us. I really do. I do believe that eventually things will change back, and if we just stay, if we don't give up, do you know what I mean? Like if we just don't give up, and it might be harder in some places than others. I feel like, it's going to be harder in places that don't actually see disability as equal. And in some places that for some reason it makes sense to them that the education would be moved to health services, which is, can we talk about the how like the main concern is if it moves to health services, then we take step backwards to when it was institutions instead of equal education in a classroom with least restrictive environment and supports to accessing the curriculum. How does that open the door to step backwards?
So I think the problem is too the overall trend we're seeing. So it's the movement from having disability, special education in the Department of Education and moving it over to Health and Human Services. So we have the medical and the social model of disability. So the medical model says that a disability is like a problem to be fixed. And in some cases, there's some truth to that. If my kid has a heart defect, I want them to have surgery to repair that. So there is an element of truth in that, and we do cover medical issues for people with disabilities through Health and Human Services. However, we also have the social model of disability, which says that a lot of the challenges that our kids face are because of the way society is set up. Like if you don't have ramps for people to get into a building, then they can't access it. And that's not a problem with the person, it's a problem with the way the building is set up. So when we're talking about education too, we need to give teachers the resources that they need to modify curriculums, to, know how to access different types of support staff. And that's what education specializes in. And if you move it over to the medical providers, they don't really understand that realm. So that's one of the ways in which that's challenging, but and that's just on the agency level. But if we look at kind of the broader trends we're seeing, so moving special education from Department of Education to HHS. And then the other thing we had recently was an opinion that was released by the Department of Justice saying that that the Olmstead decision, and which I'll explain in a minute, that was a Supreme Court decision that said if people with disabilities could live in the community, they should be given the opportunity to do that instead of an institutionalized setting. And so this Department of Justice opinion said that the Olmstead decision does not impose an integration mandate. Now, that is not in keeping with the law. It is not in keeping with the judicial decisions that have preceded it. But it does mean that the federal government is saying that they are no longer going to um, stand behind that. So, and that can be really difficult if you have states that are moving toward an institutional model. And then on top of that, we have the Medicaid cuts, which Medicaid cuts end up hurting our population the most first because our different waivers, like the home and community-based service waivers that allow our loved ones to have support staff and to, have jobs coaches, job support, all of that, it's called a waiver because the default is that they can go to an institution. So they are waiving their right to go to an institution or to a nursing home is what it would look like right now. They're waiving that right in order to live in the community. And it is not usually, it is less expensive
Mm-hmm.
for them to live in the community. But they still need supports and services in order to be successful and do that, especially as as they're into adulthood. So if you're cutting Medicaid at the same time that you're issuing a Department of Justice opinion that, we are no longer going to impose the integration mandate. And if you are also saying that education now falls under Health and Human Services and that we are going to do block grants and trust states to do the right thing, then you are leaving the door wide open for our population to move toward institutionalization back. And that's a really scary place to be. I've got my dad's cousin, who I am the family representative for, who was born in 1960, prior to, the Olmstead decision, prior to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And he was institutionalized at 10 years old. And he
Jeez.
didn't move out of that institution until 2003. So when he was 43 years old. And because the Olmstead decision was in 1999. And that's how he ended up moving out. Now, is our system currently perfect? Absolutely not. I mean, people can have some real legitimate complaints, but to go back to where we were is not the answer. The answer is not to use a sledgehammer, but instead to use a precision tool and cut and figure out what's working, what doesn't work, and have the people who are most educated about it make those decisions and work together and empower them and give them, the funding and the tools to do that, but not to just cut these programs.
Well, we know the reasoning here is for cost effectiveness, apparently, although
And
we're in
inequality.
agreement that it's cheaper in many ways the way we're doing it now. I mean, look for fraud and cut that out precision wise, right? Not just there's fraud, there could be fraud in this area, let's just shut that area down. That doesn't make much sense to me. But also, am I wrong in the fact that the people that have been laid off or haven't really been laid off, they're on administrative leave, so they're actually being paid to not work now, or are people been fired in the Department of Education?
I can't speak completely intelligently to that. I do know that the people who were hired within a certain period of time were actually permanently let go.
Okay.
And I do know that they have reduced the staff there, I mean, by a huge percentage. Stephanie Smith Lee from National Down Syndrome Congress can tell you all of the details on that. She's amazing. And she used to be the director of the Office of Special Education under George W. Bush. So and she is currently our head there at NDSC, National Down Syndrome Congress. But I don't know if any are still receiving payment who are not coming to work. That I'm unaware of.
Yeah.
So I have two questions. One, they can't make you send your loved one to an institution.
No, no, they cannot.
Okay.
And you still have, I mean, the law is still on your side. So
Right.
they can change this opinion and it ends up being more systemic. So like if a state says, we are going to put more funding back into institutions, the federal government can't step in and say, hey, that this is not the preferred model. We don't want you to go that direction. And if you do, then we are not going to provide the funding that or the matching funds that you might otherwise get, something like that. Um, but on an individual level, absolutely not. But what they can do is create a system that makes it a lot harder for people to keep their loved one at home. So if you're not funding, for example, the home and community-based service waivers, then it could be that a parent has to stay home who normally would have worked. And then you end up having people who maybe were trying to save for retirement for three, trying to do that on one income. And so can become, and then you maybe have parents who don't survive as long because of caregiver burden, because of the way that it trickles down. So there is a whole series of events that then get set up to make it easier to institutionalize people. Or families just can't afford the services that their loved one needs, and out of desperation, they do that.
So the law is still there. It's an act of Congress. Maybe the forewarning is that, hey, the government realizes there's not going to be a congressional vote on if IDEA is going to continue, or 504s and stuff like that. But if we can get it to the state level, maybe we can kind of break this up a little bit. So we need, as advocates, to be
Diligent.
Yeah. I mean, what is the thought process that we just need to just be aware of this and be prepared for what?
Because I also want to say, when you're talking about the integration, when you go to education, and I know they're moving things around, but Brown versus the Board of Education, that's IDEA rests upon that decision. Brown versus the Board of Education makes it illegal to segregate within the school, right? That's illegal. So that part of me is just like bringing it back to a reminder that to our community, because I think that we really need to have a foundation beneath us to understand that inclusion and equal education was not created for disability. That was created on so many other prejudices and discriminations in our history. And we built on the changes that were made incrementally. And that's our foundation for IDEA.
I think what's really helpful at this time, I would say, first and foremost, to pay attention to what the National Down Syndrome Congress, National Down Syndrome Society, the ARC, what their advocacy action alerts, and make sure that when they give those alerts, that you are being responsive and contacting your legislators. So that's on a federal level, right? But then on a state level, watch and see what's happening and build relationships with your legislators, both at a state and federal level, so that you can communicate with them about these issues. And what I mean by paying attention at a state level, so for example, we just had an issue where the legislators in the state of Georgia, where I live, had proposed an increase in the number of home and community-based service waivers. And then our governor pulled it back down to 100. And I think it was either 400 or 500 that the legislators had approved. And our governor brought that back down so that he could then give a reimbursement to people for a surplus that we had, which the surplus then was built on the backs of people that they didn't provide home and community-based service waivers to. So it's important to pay attention to also your state organizations. Most states have a developmental disabilities council. Look at the different announcements that they're giving you at a state level, and reach out to your legislators and let them know that you're upset about this, that this affects your vote and how you feel about things. And, and it's happening in states all over the country right now. There were, Kentucky, where I also stay quite abreast of what's going on there. They had some cuts to medical services for community medical services for people with disabilities. And those were because of state level cuts that were prompted by some of the federal cuts. So I think just making sure that you're seeing, are those trickle downs actually hitting our populations? And if they are, then we need to stand together and speak out. And going back to our idea of hope, I do think there are power in numbers in us doing those things. But I think we have to be paying attention to those trusted sources for federal, and then also the trusted sources for state. And then for our own individuals to know our rights. And there are lots of different ways to know our rights. There's, partners in policy making. If people participate in that, that's great training that every state does. There's also the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities in Minnesota. They have a great training about the history of disability rights. Because if we don't know the history, like you were saying, Lori, we can't know when it's being taken away from us. So it's really important to be aware of that and to understand that like this isn't a party issue. This is a pro-disability perspective. So, I mean, we have people who are in leadership at National Down Syndrome Congress who are bipartisan. They are trying, their best to be as balanced as possible. And that where all of these people fall is being pro Down syndrome and pro disability.
Well, we'll make sure we get all those links, by the way, so we can put that in our show notes. It'll be listed in the description of our YouTube channel and everywhere that you get the podcast. So we'll have those links there.
Because I feel like when we're up against these challenges as a community, it can feel lonely. I mean, we really feel the attack. We really feel the words. And then also, people who aren't affected by it, we feel that indifference. And unfortunately, I with disability, it's been my experience that indifference is common. I feel like people not part of the community, which I think is an illusion that people think that they're not part of the disability community. Because everybody is, but the prejudices and discriminations and offenses that happen, I think people accept those. You know what I mean? Like when we fight for Liam's right to an education, I've had more parents be like, "Oh yeah, no, there's nobody with Down syndrome in my school," and it's just, and they don't question why, right? And what I strive to do is to bring awareness that we have so much marginalization presently and historically. And at certain points in time, every group has had to stand up and fight. And some have been more successful in making changes and finding their voice and getting their allies and just really confronting that oppression. I feel like disability is one of the last, because I feel like the nature of disability, like some disabilities are, I don't have a voice, or my language isn't intelligible, or you know what I mean? Like, or I need that support for you to hear me. That's why if every human could really study what happened when we got 504 passed, like if they would understand that individuals with disabilities took the wheelchairs and sat on the steps, because there was no ramps in some places, no supports to use the restroom. I mean, that was such a big, brave, powerful fight to make these changes. And that's part of like knowing the history, right? But we're not alone in that. We just have, I feel like there's that added layer that we need to push through. Like the mindset of what I experience is, oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Why? Yeah.
I think one way, and this was something that we talked about as specifically in our advocacy boot camp, was how to share your story so that your friends and family members understand the value of these services. Because I think that's part of it too, because we're so proud of our loved ones that I think we want to share all of their successes. And they have these great things going on in life. And there are also supports that help them achieve those things. And there's no shame in that. Those are integral to the story. And so I think letting people know in a way that is respectful of our loved ones, but saying that my child, yes, he's got a job, he is thriving, but he doesn't, we still want him to get more hours. We still want him to have more success. And in order to do that, he has to have support staff. He has to have job coaches. There is a whole infrastructure of support to get there. And so what I try to do is use really plain language and explain to people So whenever you tell a story, there are three good points to it: ethos, pathos, and logos. And this goes back to the Greeks. It's one of my favorite things. But ethos, it's your credibility. Your credibility is your parent. You have your own experience living this life. Your second is logos, and that's using logic and explaining to people, in order for my child to thrive in school, we needed special education services that gave him access to, a peer support in the classroom and that gave him a co-teaching situation. And then we have the pathos, and that's the heart of the story, right? That's the emotion. And saying, because of this, he is meaningfully valued in his community because he was included. He was part of the lacrosse team. They love him. And now he's able to go out and serve in the community. And, so I think people need to see where these laws actually impact our lives and why they're so important to fight for. So I think that that's part of it in sharing our story, but also we have to learn, because disability is one of those things that you're kind of plopped into, right? It's one of those identities that anybody can get at any time, like you said, but you don't have a lineage like you do with some other different kinds of identities that we might have. Unless you are maybe, I've got a sister-in-law who's deaf and she's got deaf children. So sometimes there's learning that comes from that. But in most cases with Down syndrome, we just kind of arrive there, right? And so we have to get some education about what the history and the laws are. And I will say another cool thing that's coming out toward what you were saying about Section 504 is they are coming out with a Judy Human movie. And I'm
Oh, I know. Gosh, that looks great.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about that movie
Well,
because I love Judy Human.
Oh, yes. What I'm seeing online really is like these two perspectives of disability that's kind of rising right now is like this idea of this really overwhelming love for people with Down syndrome, like almost, we have it all the time. For us as a couple, as a podcast, we've represented that we see, when people speak of Liam or speak of people with Down syndrome as angels or just, oh, bless their heart, such a blessing and teaching us patience, and that kind of idea to us pushes specifically our child to a place of maybe like an object and like and not as human as the words we want to hear. But there is an overwhelming love that people feel. They may not know how to express that, and they may not be as on point with our idea of true equality and what that means, and speaking of someone as an equal to you, rather than this thing that you're going to praise in a objectifying kind of way. But then there's also this rise of this feeling that we can't let this 1 or 2 or 3 kids in a classroom with an IEP disrupt the other 27 kids in class or whatever the idea is. And there's a real kind of, I see it in almost like AI postings and stuff too, but it's this thing that's getting a lot of activity. I mean, it's one thing to say, well, might not even be a true
It's propaganda
thing, but there's hundreds of thousands of people following this page, of propaganda that the special education system needs to be separate from the general education, and that those two things can't mix, and that kids with an IEP would take away from a classroom, a gen ed classroom, and a quote unquote normal student, because that's how it's worded, and it's hurtful. I mean, it's this dichotomy that I'm seeing in social media, but I think it's reflective of society. I
have such a problem with everything you just said because, one, I don't repeat that stuff because I feel like that propaganda is put out there to push more propaganda. And I hope that ignites a fire in everyone, because I feel like that, I know that is just a sign that we need to use our voices. All of that junk is not true. Like, I'm just going to call it junk. Because we know inclusion, and this is why I want to neutralize it. So part of me is like, this is about disability, and we really have to fight for those rights. We really have to put eyes on the fact that, again, this community is being attacked, and they're really attacking people who need the support sometimes to use their voice, to get up the steps, to fight their fight, right? And so that we have to honor. But also, this is about humanity. This is about how we treat everyone. And if you're looking at someone who's an ableist, who is discriminating against disability and trying to hurt individuals, like that is a problem for humanity. And I think that it's an attack on what is viewed as not equal, what is viewed as weak, and none of those statements are true. Because I can tell you my son in a classroom is stronger, is equal, is able,
Is an asset.
is an at like all of those things to every other student, because you don't walk into a classroom, I guess, unless it's a private school and everybody's had some kind of testing to where they're all replicants of each other. But you don't walk into a classroom, a job, a store, anything, and have everybody be like they everybody. That's what makes us beautiful as a society, as a community. Everything worth saving, everything that art expresses is because of our differences. And I'm just so tired of I don't even, I know it exists. It's that same thing. I know this garbage exists. I just don't want to give it any energy.
Well, I bring
want
it up
the
because
energy
we
to
need
Right.
disability
Because it's not
representation,
true.
but we
And
also
when
need society too.
But it also leaks into our community, and then our community is gaslit
Exactly.
into believing, like women were gaslit into believing that you vote where your husband votes. You don't need to vote. You don't need to read. Remember that. Every female, women were once the ones that didn't receive an education. We couldn't have a credit card into the 70s. We couldn't own a home. I mean, we're still fighting for equal pay. So my concern is our community. Know that we're not alone in having to fight for our rights. We're not alone in having to fight for being seen and for being treated as we belong. So we have to come from the inside. We belong. And we are equal. Period. That's just it. Nobody is better than anyone else. I've never deigned to think I was, and I really work hard to not think that somebody is better than me.
There are a number of different parts of that argument, right? Like there's a moral and ethical argument that each person is inherently of worth and that we want them to be part of our community because they are human and because they are, you know, wonderfully complex. And we want that. And we want to have classrooms where kids exhibit different kinds of intelligences. I mean, you want to have children who are kind, who are, yes, bright, who are a mix of all of those things, those characteristics, because that tapestry is, like you said, what makes us wonderful. But I also think there's a logical argument to be added to that, that the data shows that inclusion benefits everyone. It benefits our children with disabilities. It also benefits their peers. And I've seen it in my own life. I mean, I've seen that these kids who grow up with Andy go on to be special education teachers, physical therapists. I see it with my own, with his siblings. They are kinder. They are more in tune with people who are experiencing injustice. Like there are so many benefits that are both moral and ethical, but also quantifiable. Like it is real and we can demonstrate it. But I think I see what you're saying though, Steve, where we do have this line of where people are it's inspiration porn is what, the word
That's
that
great. Yeah,
has been used for it, right? And I think
that's
with
true.
that, it's like people really want to see, oh, I defeated the odds and I did these things, and that's something that we do have to be very careful about because it can objectify people in ways that dehumanizes them. But I think it comes from, and this is probably again the optimistic part of me, I think people want to be supportive, kind, loving, and they don't realize that they're doing that. They
Yes.
truly don't. It doesn't come from a place of meanness, but it does come from a place of not having real relationships. Because I've had people say to me, oh, he's an angel. Isn't he just the sweetest all the time? And I'm like, you've clearly never hung out with him because
Mm-hmm.
he's not. I'm like, he is just oh, at the time I'd be like, he's just a regular boy. Like sometimes he's sweet, sometimes he's cranky. He has all the range of emotions that any person has. And he doesn't have to be sweet to qualify his existence.
Hmm.
Right.
Just has to be himself. And so I think there is a piece of that, but there's this other really mean streak that's happening where we're seeing a rise in the use of the R word on
Hmm.
social media that is becoming normalized again in a way that I have not seen in, the past 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also, and it's done in like a deliberate in your face kind of way because now it's known that it's offensive and we're doing it because we don't want to be kind. Um, and then I think on top of that, we are seeing an undercurrent, and this is a lot of my other writings that I talk about in Silicon Valley of developing these different companies where they are trying to do gene editing and polygenic embryo screening and choosing the smartest, the kids with certain color eyes, all of those things. They can't actually do it. The science doesn't actually work. But that's what is being marketed. And it's a dangerous, it's a dangerous marketing strategy to use because they're trying to shift the Overton window of what's acceptable to talk about and to say it, you know what, actually, that trying to sell that we want the smartest, most customized kids. That's a really dangerous way to think about parenting.
Yeah. And historically, we've seen others who have believed that way, and we've seen the harm that they've done. Like at some point, we have to learn. And when you were talking about, part of me when you were talking about the angel and the ableist, part of me feels like, you know what? If you're just going to be an ableist and see my son as an angel, and you want that inspiration porn, great. Just so don't
Get in the way.
don't get in the way. And you know what? In order for you to get that guy running across the field and making the touchdown, he needs to be in the classroom with the rest of the students. Like, if I guess you just accept when you're experiencing those mindsets, you not to get mad, because as you said, it does come from a place of, I mean, how can people be anywhere else when history is what it is, right? When we're fighting not to go backwards in history, and people don't know the impact of what that history was, so they don't understand. Like, if you're not on this journey, they don't understand. The word institution should make everybody sick to their stomach.
Well, society has a long track record of, wow, I really want this to happen, but not in my neighborhood. Like, hey, well, they shouldn't be homeless, so we should build these little homes for them. But wait, can it be like someplace else?
And I think
Or,
that kid is so great and such an angel, but why is he in my son's class?
or to care so much about like babies that have Down syndrome, but then not support later on in adulthood. Like, we really have to follow up,
Preach.
right? There has to be like a true feeling, not just a heartfelt a tug for like this innocent person that you have in your mind. Of
When
what
it's
that is.
convenient.
When it's convenient, right?
Well, and that's the thing, and I think that's what we're trying to pull people into. It's like, okay, if you truly love my son, if you truly are, inspired by these stories, then you have to support the services that allow for them to flourish. If you don't, then it is all lip service.
You say it so much more eloquently and
I
peaceful
know.
than I did. I just
No, me
get
too.
so mad. I get so mad. Go ahead. I'm sorry, please.
And I do need to give credit to Stella Young for the inspiration porn.
That's so good. Oh my gosh.
She was an amazing advocate, and I just wanted to make sure that I give proper credit where it's due. But I think we have to be careful, so careful about, if you're going to pick up one end of the stick, you have to pick it for babies and children. You have to pick up the other end of the stick for adults.
Yeah, maybe it's messy, but like that's life. People just love this like really like clean, specific view they can have, but not really dig too deep, and then you dig deep and go, oh well, we have to do. There's
Oh, I
work to
got
be
it.
done.
Yeah. Well, and also, and this is my voice, is that go outside, go to your grocery store, look at individuals that are neurotypical or not like presenting with a disability. I look at my son and I'm like, I don't understand. I don't understand
With this idea of like greatness.
this idea of that of inequality. Like I
Mm-hmm.
really don't. I don't understand.
Yeah.
Like
No.
you see.
I
Like,
don't look at the rest of the world and think, wow, I understand
oh
how they think they're
gosh,
superior
yeah,
to
I
my
get.
son.
Yeah, no, I don't. I
Right.
don't understand that. I don't understand how, like, I mean, I've walked into a coffee shop and everybody needs help. Sometimes people forget my order. Like, there's not.
Yeah.
I don't see this large gap. Like, I don't. I don't see this light that is just that says that the different way that my child does things is anything that should be held against him. Like I just really don't. And that's me, and that's my hope and optimism. That's the way I see. That's actually the way I see everybody. But I don't when I'm dealing with people who have misperceptions and prejudices against my son. I've been in the world enough to go. You're wrong. You're wrong. You know.
I think it also comes, I mean, I think it comes from parenting our children and having that experience, but also, I guess I'm thinking of if we had a classroom, right, where let's say this came to fruition, where only the best and brightest and, we're not going to say best and brightest, we're going to say the most intelligent people were in the classroom, were selected to be born, I mean, do we actually think that that is a utopia or a dystopia? Because I'm telling you that when I have seen the most intelligent and yet emotionally detached people, that's usually not the best outcome. And it's important to have the mix of us because it helps balance everything out. And when you eliminate that balance, I actually think that's where it gets pretty dystopian.
What does that mean? The most intelligent.
But
To
also that idea of like maximizing a quality, like when you talk about genetics, I want blue eyes, I want this look, I want a nose like that. That we're having that in adults right now. I mean, there's a real trend of people changing themselves, maxing out their thoughts of what a perfection would be, and it's become like there's YouTubers that are doing that are like having surgeries, having different kind of workouts, different supplements and whatever to be perfect and what they say is perfect. And
it's super.
it's
Are you talking in
subjective,
just a
first
super?
of all.
Yeah, and it's also a very superficial.
Superficial, but it's not like it's mocked. I mean, it's trending.
Yeah, and I do want to clarify too, at least for my purpose or what I was saying before, is that I was kind of referring to so Nucleus Genomics had this Subway ad campaign where they were saying have your best baby and pick, trying to optimize intelligence. And again, I will clarify, the science is not validated.
Yeah,
But that is that is what they are advertising to people, and they mean academic intelligence. Like they don't mean how we perceive it. Having studied the different types of intelligences, they mean it academically.
but you just said the science isn't there, right? So it's false advertising, but also it does propagate that opinion of inequality.
And I think that's my big concern is the ideology behind it because very few people can afford this because this is called polygenic embryo screening and it's where they try to put together different formulas to optimize an embryo that they then is implanted through IVF. And so it's not this is being used by a small minority of people, but it is a trending technology in Silicon Valley. And I think it's something that we kind of need to be aware of the messaging about, because I think that messaging ends up filtering into society. And so we have to be vigilant about the messages that are being propagated, especially by people in real positions of influence. because the people who are supporting these are your kind of billionaire tech bros, and so they've got a lot of influence. And so even though it doesn't really have traction now and it's not scientifically valid now, it is it is a goal and it is something that is being marketed.
Well, genetic testing is, part of IVF and has been, where people say, I've got these 10 embryos and I'm going to genetic test them for whatever, and I know Down syndrome's in there, and they'll discard the ones that didn't pass their test. And that's just, that's a reality. But people are trying to be more specific and more specific. And
But that's one thing that, like, about testing, that when I was pregnant with Sophia, they pushed me to test. They told me the likelihood of Sophia having Down syndrome was very high, and I should do something about it before too late. Like, they told me that, and then with, we've talked about this before with Liam, they were like, no, I don't see any signs. But I said I didn't want any of the blood work done, and I had a doctor that did it anyway, and we left that doctor. We did it anyway. And then when she came back and she was like, well, I wanted to tell you, I was like, I told you, like, and so I left. I was just like, I specifically said, I don't want to know. And I don't want that test done. And she did it. So we left. And, when you're talking about that is the first impact that parents have. That's like the mom, is the carry, like, that's the first information that you get about your child, is this testing, and it sets a mind. It's at the foundation of the mindset of the inequality, of that this, for some reason, if we see that your son or your daughter, your child has an extra chromosome, then you probably don't want to carry through with that pregnancy. Like, that is the conversation, that heavy testing and the conversations, like that's reflexive of this, testing that's happening, or that they're trying to create now. It's like one step further from what we've been experiencing, what moms have been experiencing. I don't know why I stumble over the word mom, because you could be a surrogate. You could be like, I don't know why I stumble over that word, but anybody who is carrying a child, like this is that message. And we know how much it hurts. We know all the feelings that it creates. We know the conversation. We know the prejudices and the misperceptions and all of those things. And this is like it on steroids.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's so hard, because when people are presented that information, even now, right, with just typical prenatal screening, we know that 61% of clinicians say, I'm sorry, or present the information as bad news. And so what the way that we have to really address the inequality there is making sure that families are getting accurate, up-to-date, balanced information about any genetic condition that they're being tested for. And when we do that, it's like it needs to be created with input from the National Medical Genetics and advocacy organizations, to be able to say, this is what actually accurately represents our people, and to have pictures of people living with those conditions and what our lives look like. And I think that's where I think that we don't even have the infrastructure right now to be managing that in a way that's equitable. And so then to talk about, well, we're just going to take for granted that disability is to be avoided, and we are going to try to go for creating a certain type of child. Like, that's, to me, that is both uh, it belies underlying prejudices about disability, but then on top of that, I'm troubled by that as a parent, and the kind of expectations that puts on a child. If you think you're going to create a certain type of child, let me tell you that even if you could control every single genetic piece, there is nurture and there are environmental factors, and that kid is going to be who they are going to be. And what kind of relationship does it set up between parents when that's you go into it with that expectation that you can control them. That's some, and for unconditional love. Like I think a lot of people have some concerns about that. So I actually think the broader public, if they understood that that was the direction the science was headed, would be concerned about that.
When you say that, I'm curious, like how many parents are actually part of that, like research? Because if there's parents on board, they've got to be like, I can do every single solitary thing. And guess what? Like unless you're good, like now you're just create a robot. Like just make a robot like Rosie from the cartoon and put her in your house, and she's going to do exactly, sometimes even Rosie the robot on what the Jetsons like did what she wanted to do anyway. Like, because AI learns, right? Isn't that part of it? I wonder if that conversation has ever been made. And that seems just ironic, like the individuals that are creating that, like how much did they fight to be just who they are?
And I guess just to bring everything hopefully kind of full circle, because I know
Yes.
we're at the hour, but I think my big advocacy piece that I also always go for is that for any of these conversations, people with disabilities and our communities should be included in those conversations before we set any policies about the use of these new technologies and also the existing services that we are currently receiving. People with disabilities, advocacy organizations should be part of those conversations, and the decision should not be made without them, but they should be integral parts of those conversations from the very beginning. And so I think that's where I think most people in our community can agree to put a stake in the ground, is that we deserve to be part of those conversations and to bring in the people who are most expert and most, experienced in those conversations. So that's where I mean, I think we would have broad consensus that is an important component of approaching any of these services, programs, policies.
And right now, as things are like the Department of Education and special education are under attack, then it's important. You're going to give us those links that we know our rights. We know the history of disability rights. We know the rights that we still have that are in place. They haven't been removed. We still have those rights. It just might be more work on our part to keep them upheld. But to know them, and this is the time that we use our voice, and this is the time that we continue to forge that path that we've been on, and that we are very aware of what's going on so we don't fall backwards.
Yeah, and there's a lot of us. There's a lot of people that are touched by the disability community. I mean, and so if we can use that voice in a specific, focused way through these links and just reaching out to your representatives and senators, we can be loud.
But it's not only just like people who are touched by individuals with disabilities or disability rights. It's human rights.
Yeah.
Like we're talking about humanity. We're talking about that we advocate for each other. We're talking about looking right next to us. Like this, it's not just disability rights that are and special education that's being attacked. It's about human rights. It's about equality. It's about inclusion. It's about a sense of belonging. Like why I feel that we're here. Love makes a difference. We stand up for each other. We see when something wrong is happening, and we use our voice. And if we're not in the community, then we're allies. And that's what we see across the board as a society, as human beings. That's what we see, and that's where we see, and that's really what has been. You want inspiration porn? Like I want to see like a bunch of people standing next to me fighting for my son's rights. Like when we stand up for each other, that's what inspires me. That's what makes me think, yeah, we're fighting the good fight, right? We're doing the work to evolve as a society.
I think we have friends and family who want to be those allies, and they just need guidance on how to do it. And they need guidance on how those supports and services that we're advocating for are part of our story. And that we have gotten to where we are because of those things, and that we need them to stand beside us to preserve them.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Stephanie,
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Please follow us on Twitter at If We Knew Then Pod, and you can drop us a line on our Facebook page at If We Knew Then Pod, or visit our website, ifweknewthen.com, to send us an email with questions and comments. And you can join our mailing list there and get alerts of future podcast episodes. All these links will be added to this episode's show notes. Thank you again, and we look forward to you joining us on the next episode of If We Knew Then.
From the